A lecture by Swami Vivekananda, presented in Los Angeles in the year 1900. Christ the Messenger. A wave rises on the ocean, and there is a hollow. Again another wave rises, perhaps bigger than the first, to fall again, then again to rise, driving onward. Similarly, in the march of events, we notice the rise and fall, but we generally look towards the rise, forgetting the fall. Both are necessary and both are great. This is the nature of the universe. Whether in the world of our thoughts or in our spiritual affairs, this same movement of succession of rises and falls is going on. Hence, great predominances in the march of events. The liberal ideas are marshaled ahead to sink down, to digest, as it were, to ruminate over the past, to adjust, to conserve, to gather strength once more for a rise and a bigger one. The history of nations, also, has ever been like that. The great soul, the messenger we are to study this afternoon, came at a period of the history of his race which we may well designate as a great fall. We catch only little glimpses here and there of the stray records that have been kept of his sayings and doings, for verily it has been well said that the doings and sayings of that great soul would fill the world if they had all been written down. And the 3 years of his ministry were like one compressed, concentrated age, which it has taken 1900 years to unfold, and who knows how much longer it will yet take. Little men like you and me are the recipients of just a little energy. A few minutes, a few hours, a few years at best are enough to spend it all, to stretch it out, as it were, to its fullest strength, and then we are gone forever. But mark this giant that came. Centuries and ages pass, yet the energy that he left upon the world is not yet stretched out, not yet expended to its full. It goes on, adding new vigor as the ages roll on. Now what you see in the life of Christ is the life of all the past. The life of every man is, in a manner, the life of the past. It comes to him through heredity, through surroundings, through education, through his own reincarnation, the past of the race. In a way, the past of the earth, the past of the whole world is there, upon every soul. What are we in the present but a result and effect in the hands of the infinite past? What are we but floating wavelets in the eternal currents of events, irresistibly moved forward and onward and incapable of rest? But you and I are only little things, bubbles. There are always some giant waves in the ocean of affairs, and in you and me the life of the past race has been embodied only a little, but there are giants who embody, as it were, almost the whole of the past and who stretch out hands for the future. These are the signposts here and there which point to the march of humanity. These are verily gigantic, their shadows covering the earth. They stand undying, eternal. As it has been said by the same messenger, no man hath seen God at any time but through the Son. And that is true. And where shall we see God but in the Son? It is true that you and I, and the poorest of us, the meanest even, embody that God, even reflect that God. The vibration of light is everywhere, omnipresent, but we have to strike the light of the lamp before we can see the light. The omnipresent God of the universe cannot be seen until he is reflected by these giant lamps of the earth. The prophets, the man-gods, the incarnations, the embodiments of God. We all know that God exists, and yet we do not see him. We do not understand him. Take one of these great messengers of light, compare his character with the highest ideal of God that you ever formed, and you will find that your God falls short of the ideal, and that the character of the prophet exceeds your conceptions. You cannot even form a higher ideal of God than what the actual embodied have practically realized and set before us as an example. Is it wrong, therefore, to worship these as God? Is it a sin to fall at the feet of these man-gods and worship them as the only divine beings in the world? If they are really, actually, higher than all our conceptions of God, what harm is there in worshiping them? Not only is there no harm, but it is the only possible and positive way of worship. However much you may try, by struggle, by abstraction, by whatsoever method you like, still, so long as you are a man in the world of men, your world is human, your religion is human, and your God is human. And that must be so. Who is not practical enough to take up an actually existing thing and give up an idea which is only an abstraction, which he cannot grasp, and which is difficult of approach except through a concrete medium? Therefore, these incarnations of God have been worshipped in all ages and in all countries. We are now going to study a little of the life of Christ, the incarnation of the Jews. When Christ was born, the Jews were in that state which I call a state of fall between two waves, a state of conservatism, a state where the human mind is, as it were, tired for the time being of moving forward and is taking care only of what it has already, a state when the attention is more bent upon particulars, upon details, than upon the great, general, and bigger problems of life, a state of stagnation rather than of towing ahead, a state of suffering more than of doing. Mark you, I do not blame this state of things. We have no right to criticize it, because had it not been for this fall, the next rise, which was embodied in Jesus of Nazareth, would have been impossible. The Pharisees and the Sadducees may have been insincere. They may have been doing things which they ought not to have done. They may have been even hypocrites. But whatever they were, these factors were the very cause of which the messenger was the effect. The Pharisees and Sadducees at one end were the very impetus which came out at the other end as the gigantic brain of Jesus of Nazareth. The attention to forms, to formulas, to the everyday details of religion, and to rituals may sometimes be laughed at, but nevertheless, within them is strength. Many times in the rushing forward, we lose much strength. As a fact, the fanatic is stronger than the liberal man. Even the fanatic, therefore, has one great virtue. He conserves energy, a tremendous amount of it. As with the individual, so with the race, energy is gathered to be conserved. Hemmed in all around by external enemies, driven to focus in a center by the Romans, by the Hellenic tendencies in the world of intellect, by waves from Persia, India, and Alexandria, hemmed in physically, mentally, and morally, there stood the race with an inherent conservative, tremendous strength which their descendants have not lost even today. And the race was forced to concentrate and focus all its energies upon Jerusalem and Judaism, and like all power when once gathered, it cannot remain collected. It must expend and expand itself. There is no power on earth which can be kept long confined within a narrow limit. It cannot be kept compressed too long to allow of expansion at a subsequent period. This concentrated energy amongst the Jewish race found its expression at the next period in the rise of Christianity. The gathered streams collected into a body. Gradually, all the little streams joined together and became a surging wave, on the top of which we find standing out that character of Jesus of Nazareth. Thus, every prophet is a creation of his own times, the creation of the past of his race. He himself is the creator of the future. The cause of today is the effect of the past, and the cause of the future. In this position stands the messenger. In him is embodied all that is the best and greatest in his own race, the meaning, the life, for which the race has struggled for ages, and he himself is the impetus for the future, not only to his own race, but to unnumbered other races of the world. We must bear another fact in mind, that my view of the great prophet of Nazareth would be from the standpoint of the Orient. Many times you forget, also, that the Nazarene himself was an Oriental of the Orientals. With all your attempts to paint him with blue eyes and yellow hair, still the Nazarene was an Oriental. All the similes, the imageries in which the Bible is written, the scenes, the locations, the attitudes, the groups, the poetry and symbol, speak to you of the Orient, of the bright sky, of the heat of the sun, of the desert, of thirsty men and animals, of men and women coming with pitchers on their heads to fill them at the wells, of the flocks, of the plowmen, of the cultivation that is going on around, of the water mill and wheel, of the mill pond, of the millstones. All these are to be seen today in Asia. The voice of Asia has been the voice of religion. The voice of Europe is the voice of politics. Each is great in its own sphere. The voice of Europe is the voice of ancient Greece. To the Greek mind, his immediate society was all in all. Beyond that, it is barbarian. None but the Greek has the right to live. Whatever the Greeks do is right and correct. Whatever else there exists in the world is neither right nor correct, nor should be allowed to live. It is intensely human in its sympathies, intensely natural, intensely artistic, therefore. The Greek lives entirely in this world. He does not care to dream. Even his poetry is practical. His gods and goddesses are not only human beings, but intensely human, with all human passions and feelings, almost the same as with any of us. He loves what is beautiful, but mind you, it is always external nature, the beauty of the hills, of the snows, of the flowers, the beauty of forms and of figures, the beauty in the human face, and more often in the human form. That is what the Greeks liked. And the Greeks, being the teachers of all subsequent Europeanism, the voice of Europe is Greek. There is another type in Asia. Think of that vast, huge continent, whose mountaintops go beyond the clouds, almost touching the canopy of heaven's blue, a rolling desert of miles upon miles, where a drop of water cannot be found, neither will a blade of grass grow, interminable forests and gigantic rivers rushing down into the sea. In the midst of all these surroundings, the Oriental love of the beautiful and of the sublime developed itself in another direction. It looked inside and not outside. There is also the thirst for nature, and there is also the same thirst for power. There is also the same thirst for excellence, the same idea of the Greek and barbarian, but it has extended over a huger circle. In Asia, even today, birth or color or language never makes a race. That which makes a race is its religion. We are all Christians. We are all Mohammedans. We are all Hindus or all Buddhists. No matter if a Buddhist is a Chinaman or is a man from Persia, they think that they are brothers because of their professing the same religion. Religion is the tie, the unity of humanity. And then again, the Oriental, for the same reason, is a visionary, is a born dreamer. The ripples of the waterfalls, the songs of the birds, the beauties of the sun and moon and the stars and the whole earth are pleasant enough, but they are not sufficient for the Oriental mind. He wants to dream a dream beyond. He wants to go beyond the present. The present, as it were, is nothing to him. The Orient has been the cradle of the human race for ages, and all the vicissitudes of fortune are there. Kingdoms succeeding kingdoms, empires succeeding empires, human power, glory and wealth, all rolling down there. A Golgotha of power and learning. That is the Orient. A Golgotha of power, of kingdoms, of learning. No wonder the Oriental mind looks with contempt upon the things of this world, and naturally wants to see something that changeth not, something which dieth not, something which is in the midst of this world of misery and death is eternal, blissful, undying. An Oriental prophet never tires of insisting upon these ideals, and as for the prophets, you may also remember that without one exception, all the messengers were Orientals. We see, therefore, in the life of this great messenger of life, the first watchword, not this life, but something higher. And like the true son of the Orient, he is practical in that. You people of the West are practical in your own department, in military affairs, in managing political circles and other things. Perhaps the Oriental is not practical in those ways, but he is practical in his own field. He is practical in religion. If he preaches a philosophy, tomorrow there are hundreds who will struggle their best to make it practical in their own lives. If a man preaches that standing on one foot would lead to salvation, he will immediately get 500 to stand on one foot. You may call it ludicrous, but mark you, beneath that is their philosophy, that intense practicality. In the West, plans of salvation mean intellectual gymnastics, plans which are never worked out, never brought into practical life. In the West, the preacher who talks the best is the greatest preacher. So, we find Jesus of Nazareth, in the first place, the true son of the Orient, intensely practical. He has no faith in this evanescent world and all its belongings. No need of text torturing, as is the fashion in the West in modern times. No need of stretching out texts until they will not stretch anymore. Texts are not India rubber, and even that has its limits. Now, no making of religion to pander to the sense vanity of the present day. Mark you, let us all be honest. If we cannot follow the ideal, let us confess our weakness, but not degrade it. Let not any try to pull it down. One gets sick at heart at the different accounts of the life of the Christ that Western people give. I do not know what he was or what he was not. One could make him a great politician, another perhaps would make of him a great military general, another a great patriotic Jew, and so on. Is there any warrant in the books for all such assumptions? The best commentary on the life of the great teacher is his own life. The foxes have holes, the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man hath nowhere to lay his head. That is what Christ says is the only way to salvation. He lays down no other way. Let us confess in sackcloth and ashes that we cannot do that. We still have fondness for me and mine. We want property, money, wealth. Woe unto us! Let us confess and not put to shame that great teacher of humanity. He had no family ties, but do you think that that man had any physical ideas in him? Do you think that this mass of light, this God and not man, came down to earth to be brother of animals? And yet, people make him preach all sorts of things. He had no sex ideas. He was a soul, nothing but a soul, just working a body for the good of humanity, and that was all his relation to the body. In the soul there is no sex. The disembodied soul has no relationship to the animal, no relationship to the body. The ideal may be far away from us, but never mind, keep to the ideal. Let us confess that it is our ideal, but we cannot approach it yet. He had no other occupation in life, no other thought except that one, that he was a spirit. He was a disembodied, unfettered, unbound spirit. And not only so, but he, with his marvelous vision, had found that every man and woman, whether Jew or Gentile, whether rich or poor, whether saint or sinner, was the embodiment of the same undying spirit as himself. Therefore, the one work his whole life showed was calling upon them to realize their own spiritual nature. Give up, he says, these superstitious dreams that you are low and that you are poor. Think not that you are trampled upon and tyrannized over as if you were slaves, for within you is something that can never be tyrannized over, never be trampled upon, never be troubled, never be killed. You are all sons of God, immortal spirit. No, he declared, the kingdom of heaven is within you. I and my Father are one. Dare you stand up and say not only that, I am the Son of God, but I shall also find in my heart of hearts that I and my Father are one. That was what Jesus of Nazareth said. He never talks of this world and of this life. He has nothing to do with it except that he wants to get hold of the world as it is, give it a push, and drive it forward and onward until the whole world has reached the effulgent light of God, until everyone has realized his spiritual nature, until death is vanquished and misery banished. We have read the different stories that have been written about him. We know the scholars and their writings and the higher criticism, and we know all that has been done by study. We are not here to discuss how much of the New Testament is true. We are not here to discuss how much of that life is historical. It does not matter at all whether the New Testament was written within 500 years of his birth, nor does it matter even how much of that life is true. But there is something behind it, something we want to imitate. To tell a lie, you have to imitate a truth, and that truth is a fact. You cannot imitate that which you never perceived. But there must have been a nucleus, a tremendous power that came down, a marvelous manifestation of spiritual power, and of that we are speaking. It stands there. Therefore, we are not afraid of all the criticisms of the scholars. If I, as an Oriental, have to worship Jesus of Nazareth, there is only one way left to me, that is, to worship him as God and nothing else. Have we no right to worship him in that way, do you mean to say? If we bring him down to our own level and simply pay him a little respect as a great man, why should we worship at all? Our scriptures say, "These great children of light who manifest the light themselves, who are light themselves, they being worshipped, become as it were one with us, and we become one with them." For you see, in three ways man perceives God. At first, the undeveloped intellect of the uneducated man sees God as far away, up in the heavens somewhere, sitting on a throne as a great judge. He looks upon him as a fire, as a terror. Now that is good, for there is nothing bad in it. You must remember that humanity travels not from error to truth, but from truth to truth. It may be, if you like it better, from lower truth to higher truth, but never from error to truth. Suppose you start from here and travel toward the sun in a straight line. From here the sun looks only small in size. Suppose you go forward 1,000,000 miles, the sun will be much bigger. At every stage, the sun will become bigger and bigger. Suppose 20,000 photographs had been taken of the same sun from different standpoints. These 20,000 photographs will certainly differ from each other. But can you deny that each is a photograph of the same sun? So all forms of religion, high or low, are just different stages toward that eternal state of light, which is God himself. Some embody a lower view, some a higher, and that is all the difference. Therefore, the religions of the unthinking masses all over the world must be, and have always been, of a God who is outside of the universe, who lives in heaven, who governs from that place, who is a punisher of the bad and a rewarder of the good, and so on. As a man advanced spiritually, he began to feel that God was omnipresent, and that he must be in him, that he must be everywhere, that he was not a distant God, but clearly the soul of all souls. As my soul moves my body, even so is God the mover of my soul, soul within soul. And a few individuals who had developed enough and were pure enough went still further and at last found God. As the New Testament says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." You will find that these three stages are taught by the great teacher in the New Testament. Note the common prayer he taught: Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, and so on. A simple prayer, a child's prayer. Mark you, it is the common prayer because it is intended for the uneducated masses. To a higher circle, to those who had advanced a little more, he gave a more elevated teaching. I am in my Father, and ye in me, and I in you. Do you remember that? And then when the Jews asked him who he was, he declared that he and the Father were one, and the Jews thought that that was blasphemy. What did he mean by that? That has been also told by your prophets. Ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High. Mark the same three stages. You will find that it is easier for you to begin with the first and end with the last. The messenger came to show the path, that the Spirit is not in forms, that it is not through all sorts of vexations and knotty problems of philosophy that you know the Spirit. Better that you had no learning, better that you never read a book in your life. These are not all necessary for salvation. Neither wealth, nor position, nor power, not even learning. But what is necessary is the one thing: purity. Blessed are the pure in heart, for the spirit in its own nature is pure. How can it be otherwise? It is of God. It has come from God. In the language of the Bible, it is the breath of God. In the language of the Quran, it is the soul of God. Do you mean to say that the Spirit of God can ever be impure? But alas, it has been, as it were, covered with the dust and dirt of ages. It is only necessary to clear away the dust and dirt, and then the Spirit shines immediately. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. The kingdom of heaven is within you. Where goest thou to seek for the kingdom of God? Asks Jesus of Nazareth. When it is there within you. Cleanse the spirit, and it is there. It is already yours. How can you get what is not yours? It is yours by right. You are the heirs of immortality, sons of the eternal Father. This is the great lesson of the messenger. And another, which is the basis of all religions, is renunciation. How can you make spirit pure? By renunciation. A rich young man asked Jesus, Good Master, what shall I do that I may inherit eternal life? And Jesus said unto him, One thing thou lackest. Go thy way, sell whatever thou hast, and give to the poor, and thou shalt have treasures in heaven. And come, take up thy cross, and follow me. And he was sad at that saying, and went away grieved, for he had great possessions. We are all more or less like that. The voice is ringing in our ears day and night. In the midst of our pleasures and joys, in the midst of worldly things, we think that we have forgotten everything else. Then comes a moment's pause, and the voice rings in our ears. Give up all that thou hast, and follow me. Whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever shall lose his life for my sake shall find it. For whosoever gives up this life for his sake finds the life immortal. In the midst of all our weakness, there is a moment of pause, and then the voice rings, Give up all that thou hast. Give it to the poor and follow me. This is the one ideal he preaches, and this has been the ideal preached by all the great prophets of the world: renunciation. What is meant by renunciation? That there is only one ideal in morality: unselfishness. Be selfless. The ideal is perfect unselfishness. When a man is struck on the right cheek, he turns to him the left also. When a man's coat is carried off, he gives away his cloak also. We should work in the best way we can without dragging the ideal down. Here is the ideal. When a man has no more self in him, no possessions, nothing to call me or mine, has given himself up entirely, destroyed himself as it were, in that man is God himself. For in him self-will is gone, crushed out, annihilated. That is the ideal man. We cannot reach that state yet. Yet, let us worship the ideal and slowly struggle to reach the ideal, though maybe with faltering steps. It may be tomorrow, or it may be 1,000 years hence, but that ideal has to be reached, for it is not only the end, but also the means. To be unselfish, perfectly selfless, is salvation itself, for the man within dies, and God alone remains. One more point. All the teachers of humanity are unselfish. Suppose Jesus of Nazareth was teaching, and a man came and told him, "What you teach is beautiful. I believe that it is the way to perfection, and I am ready to follow it. But I do not care to worship you as the only begotten Son of God." What would be the answer of Jesus of Nazareth? "Very well, brother. Follow the ideal and advance in your own way. I do not care whether you give me the credit for the teaching or not. I am not a shopkeeper. I do not trade in religion. I only teach truths, and truth is nobody's property. Nobody can patent truth. Truth is God himself. Go forward." But what the disciples say nowadays is, no matter whether you practice the teachings or not, do you give credit to the man? If you credit the master, you will be saved. If not, there is no salvation for you. And thus the whole teaching of the master is degenerated, and all the struggle and fight is for the personality of the man. They do not know that in imposing that difference, they are in a manner bringing shame to the very man they want to honor, the very man that would have shrunk with shame from such an idea. What did he care if there was one man in the world that remembered him or not? He had to deliver his message, and he gave it. And if he had 20,000 lives, he would give them all up for the poorest man in the world. If he had to be tortured millions of times for 1,000,000 despised Samaritans, and if for each one of them the sacrifice of his own life would be the only condition of salvation, he would have given his life. And all this without wishing to have his name known even to a single person. Quiet, unknown, silent would he work, just as the Lord works. Now, what would the disciple say? He will tell you that you may be a perfect man, perfectly unselfish, but unless you give the credit to our teacher, to our saint, it is of no avail. Why? What is the origin of this superstition, this ignorance? The disciple thinks that the Lord can manifest himself only once. There lies the whole mistake. God manifests himself to you in man. But throughout nature, what happens once must have happened before and must happen in the future. There is nothing in nature which is not bound by law, and that means that whatever happens once must go on and must have been going on. In India, they have the same idea of the incarnations of God. One of their great incarnations, Krishna, whose grand sermon, the Bhagavad-Gita, some of you may have read, says, "Though I am unborn, of changeless nature, and Lord of beings, yet subjugating my nature, I come into being by my own Maya." Whenever virtue subsides and immorality prevails, then I body myself forth, for the protection of the good, for the destruction of the wicked, and for the establishment of Dharma. I come into being in every age. Whenever the world goes down, the Lord comes to help it forward, and so he does from time to time and place to place. In another passage, he speaks to the effect that wherever thou findest a great soul of immense power and purity struggling to raise humanity, know that he is born of my splendor, that I am there working through him. Let us therefore find God not only in Jesus of Nazareth, but in all the great ones that have preceded him, in all that came after him, and all that are yet to come. Our worship is unbounded and free. They are all manifestations of the same infinite God. They are all pure and unselfish. They struggled and gave up their lives for us, poor human beings. They each and all suffer vicarious atonement for every one of us, and also for all that are to come hereafter. In a sense, you are all prophets. Every one of you is a prophet, bearing the burden of the world on your own shoulders. Have you ever seen a man, have you ever seen a woman who is not quietly, patiently bearing his or her little burden of life? The great prophets were giants. They bore a gigantic world on their shoulders. Compared with them, we are pygmies, no doubt, yet we are doing the same task. In our little circles, in our little homes, we are bearing our little crosses. There is no one so evil, no one so worthless, but he has to bear his own cross. But with all our mistakes, with all our evil thoughts and evil deeds, there is a bright spot somewhere. There is still somewhere the golden thread through which we are always in touch with the divine. Our salutations go to all the past prophets, whose teachings and lives we have inherited, whatever may have been their race, clime, or creed. Our salutations go to all those godlike men and women who are working to help humanity, whatever be their birth, color, or race. Our salutations to those who are coming in the future, living gods to work unselfishly for our descendants.